It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Rene Salt. Your maiden name was Berkovich. And here we are in Hendon Central in London, in England, and it's such a pleasure to be in your beautiful home, in your apartment.
My beautiful home.
Rene, let me ask you, you were originally from Poland.
Yes.
Can I ask, when were you born?
In 1929.
In which town?
Zduńska Wola, near Lodz.
And can you tell a little bit about your parents, where they came from?
My parents were my father was from Zduńska Wola, my mother was from Kalisz, Błaszki, Kalisz. And we were in the war, we were in the Lodz ghetto. First we were in the Zduńska Wola ghetto, and then we found ourselves in the Lodz ghetto.
But can I ask, before, you grew up in a from home?
Yes.
Your parents were from?
Yeah, not Hasidish, but from home.
And how many children were there in the family?
There's only 2 in my family, but my father was one of 8 children, my mother was one of 4. So I had a lot of aunts and uncles and many cousins, and they had also, their parents were from families of 12 in the family, 10 in the family. So we were such a large extended family, was well over 100.
And you have a picture of your sister. Was she younger than you, or?
She was 2 years younger, yeah. She must have been here about 5, 6 years old.
And Rene, what was her name?
Stenia.
Stenia. Is she still alive?
Hitler killed her when she was 10 years old.
I'm so sorry to hear.
She was 10 years old.
So growing up in your town, did you go to a Jewish...
I went to a Jewish school.
A Jewish school?
Yes, and my sister as well. And we had a very, very, very nice, home life, religious. And my father was a chief accountant in a very large firm, the largest textile firm in Europe. And so we had a very good living. We made a very good living, and we had a lovely home. That when the Germans came, on the very first day, they entered our home and took everything out on lorries to Germany. We were left standing in the street in just what we had on. And they emptied all our flat with the silver and with the West China, and all the clothes, including the children's clothes. They took everything away.
And how soon was this after the beginning of the war?
First day.
When they came into your town?
Yeah.
So this was in September?
September 1939.
And you remember it distinctly? You remember?
I remember distinctly, yes. Yes. We were left without anything. We didn't have a home from day one.
So what did you do? What did your family do?
Well, we had to split up. You couldn't buy anything, even if you had money.
What?
You couldn't buy anything. I was sent to my grandparents, my mother's parents, in Kalisz, a town called Kalisz. And while I was away, my mother found a room in town, and she scrounged a few bits and pieces from family, from friends. She set up a little home. And then from Kalisz, I was in Kalisz with my grandparents, and then they made Kalisz Judenrein, clear of Jews. So we managed to get back to Zduńska Wola, to my mother's place. So there was 8 of us in one room without anything. They didn't have anything. My grandparents, they were evacuated from Kalisz. They didn't have anything, and we didn't have anything. So we were in one room, 8 of us, and life was very, very difficult right from the beginning. You had to go to work to get a ration book. If you didn't work, you didn't get a ration book. So I was working on a machine making socks for the army.
For the German army?
Yeah, making socks. I was 10 years old, just 10 years old. The machine, I had to climb on a stool to reach the machine. The machine was taller than I was. Well, we were there we were starving, there were hangings in the town, there were shootings, they would send people away from our town, they brought people into our town. There was one doctor practicing for the whole ghetto. There was no medication, people were dying. We carried on until 1942. In 1942, they took us to the cemetery one morning. On the cemetery, they took all the children away, up to 18 years of age. I don't know how I was left. 3 children were left. My little sister, they took away straight away. And they sent everybody to Treblinka. Everybody, nobody survived. 1,000 people went to the Lodge ghetto, and 3 children, and I was amongst the 3 children. I was one of the 3. We were sent to the Lodge ghetto. And the Lodge ghetto, you must have heard how it was. It was terrible. The overcrowding, the starvation and the diseases were appalling. We all found work in the Lodge ghetto. One day I came home with a very high temperature. My mother managed to get a doctor. She said, it's typhoid, she's got typhus, straight to the hospital. When I got to the hospital, the first thing they did for everyone who had typhus, they shaved their heads. I was crying bitterly. And the doctor said, don't cry, child. If you manage to keep your head, you'll have other hair. Of course, he was right. And on the first day, I was so ill, I nearly died, and they managed to get an injection to save my life, maybe because I was so young. They saved my life. On the second night, there was a lot of commotion there. People were crying and screaming. That the SS came along with their lorries, and they emptied out the whole hospital. But they didn't come into the contagious ward that I was in. That's how I survived. But my parents, who stood there all night long, in the morning they took me home. As ill as I was, they took me home. And I was locked in a room all day long by myself. They had to go to work. Every time I heard a little knock, I thought the SS is there, come to take me away. And as soon as I was able to walk a bit, I went back to work. And we worked like this till 1942 in the summer, when the ghetto was closed down. So the Germans started coming to our places of work, bring everyone down to the quadrangle and making soothing speeches. They told us that the ghetto is going to be closed down. You'll be sent away to working camps where conditions will be much better. They promised us good food and good living accommodations and get good medical care. Only we should come voluntarily to the stations from where we'll be sent away, because they didn't want a repetition of what happened in the Warsaw ghetto, an uprising. So we went voluntarily. And we came to the stations. They shoved us into these cattle trucks, very tightly, shut and bolted the doors, and off we went on an overnight train. And when we arrived there, they opened up the door, the great doors, and the screaming and bellowing, get off the train, get a move on, be quick. My father jumped off, and I jumped after him. By the time I jumped off, I didn't see him anymore. He disappeared like into thin air. I never saw him again. I was with my mother. They lined us up, and some of the guards were saying, "You are here now in Auschwitz-Birkenau.
Oh.
This is the place where people are being taken straight to the guest chambers." That was our greeting. They lined us up. At the head of the queue, a selection process was being conducted by the infamous Dr. Mengele, the butcher of Auschwitz, we learned later. Wherever he saw two people holding hands, they would deliberately split them up, one to the right, one to the left. They took all invalids, old people, people who didn't look fit for work, pregnant women, all went to one side, the rest went to the other side. When I got through, I was together with my mother, for which she was very grateful, and so was I. All the people who went to the right went straight through a very large room, which looked like a shower room. They had to strip first. They took away everything from them. They shaved their heads. And the screaming that was coming out of there is not possible to describe. But it didn't last very long. After about 15 minutes, all was quiet. A special the strongest men picked out from the whole camp would go in there to do that special work. They took out all the corpses into the nearby crematoria. I was with my mother on the left-hand side. They lined us up and took us right to the end of the camp. We were taken into our very large hall. We had to strip, leave our clothes on the benches. Guards were walking up and down, laughing and joking. They had the time of their lives. They collected all our valuables, whatever anybody had. They shaved everyone's head. And then we were pushed into a large room which looked like a shower room. Everyone was saying prayers and hugging, kissing one another. We thought it was our last hour. But we were the lucky ones. They still needed us for very hard work. So water came through, not gas. But apparently it was a gas chamber. Yes, from there, when we walked out of there, before we went out, they gave us some clothes to put on. They gave me a big skirt that didn't stand up, and a men's pajama jacket, and that was all. No underwear, no stockings, no shoes, nothing. And from there, they took us outside of this block. We were left sitting overnight. When we came out of there, we looked as though we had just come out of a lunatic asylum. We couldn't recognize one another. They gave us a number. When we came there from the Lodge ghetto, they didn't tattoo numbers anymore. They gave us a number on a white piece of linen with black lettering. That was our number till the end of the war. We had to spin it on, one in the front and one in the back.
Do you remember your number?
I don't remember. There was a lot of twos and a lot of threes. My mother's number and my number was just one number different. But I don't remember exactly the numbers. It was twos and threes, but I don't remember the number now. And from there we had to go to work every day. We were there in Auschwitz a few weeks. We never believed we'll ever come out alive of there.
And you didn't know what had happened to your father by this time?
No, I didn't see him. I only saw him when we arrived at the railway lines, when he jumped off the train.
And can I ask, did your parents know what had happened to your sister? Or they...
Yes, she was taken to Treblinka with all the others.
Did your parents know? Or...
Yeah, well, of course they knew.
Wait.
Of course they knew. She was taken all on her own.
That's hard.
If you talk about it, it cuts through your heart.
Yeah.
It just cuts through your heart. Yeah, I was in Auschwitz for a good few weeks. Then they sent us out on slave labor to Hamburg Harbour, into the docks. And from there we used to go to work in the early hours of the morning, come back late at night. And the bombs were falling all the time in Hamburg.
And what type of work did you do in Hamburg?
Taking apart the bombed out blocks of flats, put whole bricks onto one lorry and broken bricks onto other lorries.
And you were such a young girl doing such hard manual labor.
Yeah, I didn't feel my fingers, they were frozen, solid. Because in Germany, winter is much colder than it is here in England. It was so cold. I suffered from cold more than from hunger.
Did you get more food when you were doing the slave labor?
No, more food. More food. In the mornings we had to queue up. They were given a chunk of bread, a small chunk of bread, black bread, with a little tub of either sugar or marmalade, and some dirty looking water which they called coffee. Right. And on this we had to work so hard. People were dying, more from cold than from hunger even.
And were you with your mother?
Yeah, I was with my mother together. Yes, that's how I survived, otherwise I would not survive. One day they let out a bull. We were working near a slaughterhouse. They let out a bull to attack the people, and that bull attacked my mother so terribly, cut open all her face, and from that day on someone started.
So they let out a bull just to attack the
people, yes, and that bull attacked my mother. He cut open all her face. She couldn't go to work anymore from that day on. She was laying in a sick bay in the camp, very seriously ill. And it carried on like this till 1945. Yes, in March 1945. So they took us out from the camp, from our camp. They took my mother on a stretcher. She was on the same train, but not on the same cattle truck that I was. And on an overnight journey again. And this time they took us. When we arrived, they started screaming and carrying on, get off the train, be quick. But nobody had any strength to jump off the train anymore. We rolled off the train. We had to hold on to one another to remain standing. And they took us walking for many miles of a very wooded area till we came to our destination. When we arrived, the great doors opened up and we were pushed through. Now the scene that met us there, that you can't describe. That is not possible. You can't understand it. You can't imagine it. We got through there. The stench that arose from that camp was terrible, simply unreal. Here we saw skeletons walking. The bones were protruding to their ragged remains of skin. Some were dressed in rags, others were naked. The stench, it was terrible. Our transport was taken to a hut which was already overcrowded before we got in there. Somehow I found a little corner to sit down in and promptly fell asleep from exhaustion. When I woke up and stood up, I was covered in lice from top to bottom, in big black long lice. That's what I've never seen before. They were sucking our blood out. I soon found out that I was in a place called Bergen-Belsen. By the time I arrived there was no more any kind of organization there. There were no more roll calls like in all the other camps. There was no food distribution at all. The water supply had been cut off. There was no water. People were walking about, dropping down dead like leaves in the autumn from the trees. So people fell down and dropped dead. I didn't see my mother. I didn't know what they'd done with her, whether she died on the way or what happened to her. I was frantic. I was so scared. For the first time I was by myself alone. After a few days I walked out. I was going to look after my mother, for my mother. Miraculously, after 2 days, I found her in one of the blocks, still alive on a stretcher, but only just. I could tell that she was dying. She knew it herself because she told me not to cry when she died.
Oy.
And so I was sitting with my mother. They didn't count anybody anymore. There were no roll calls anymore. So I was sitting with my mother. After some time, I walked out after a few days for some air. When I walked out, someone pointed out a tank in the distance, and they said it was a British tank, but it didn't register anymore. I was so exhausted, I was so ill by then, that in fact I collapsed. I was unconscious for the next 10 days. I don't know who took me back into my mother's block, but I didn't know anything. But apparently the British Army arrived there and I didn't know anything about it. I came to in a delousing center. When the British Army, they took all the survivors out. They took them 6 kilometers away to another camp, which was the largest tank training school in Europe. It was a beautiful place. So when the British arrived there, they took out all the survivors from Bergen-Belsen to this camp. I was together with my mother. She died 12 days later. We all had a clean bed with clean bedding, and they started feeding us with a quarter of a slice of bread topped with a teaspoonful with stewed apples. We thought it was cruel, but in fact it was very wise, because we couldn't digest food anymore. Who started eating more collapsed and died straight away.
It's so sad, but that's what happened.
They collapsed straight away. So they started feeding us like newborn babies. Unfortunately, my mother died. Well, I knew she'll die. I could tell. I was dreaming her 2 brothers took her up to heaven. My mother is in heaven. She's looking down. Her brothers took her up. That's how it was.
And when did you meet your husband?
Oh, after the war, and not till I came to Paris. First, I found an aunt found me in Bergen-Belsen. She was in an Army camp in Braunschweig. She came to Belsen because in Belsen was a register of all survivors. So that's how she found me. And together we left Germany, and we had a terrible journey back to Poland to look for survivors. The journey was terrible. And my aunt met her husband there in Poland. He came back from the camps. And her son also came back from the camps, but he died later. And together we left Poland. In Poland I found my mother's sister. She was in Krakow in the camps.
And you met her?
Yes.
It must have been
she took me in, yes.
You must have been very emotional when you met her.
Yes. She shared every little bit she had, she shared with me. And then at the end of that year, 1945, she remarried. She lost her husband and a child in the war, and her husband lost his wife and 6 children. So they got married together. We left Poland. You couldn't stay in Poland. It was very anti-Semitic.
Did you go back to your town?
Yeah.
And
the
how
Poles were pointing out at me, why did she come back?
And your house that you once had?
No, I didn't go back. I didn't go back.
But you could feel the...
Yes, the anti-Semitism was terrible. It was terrible. We couldn't stay there. We left soon and back through Austria and through Czechoslovakia. We went back to Germany, and from Germany it took us a while, a good maybe a year or two. We went to Paris. That was also, every journey had a story in itself. We came to Paris. In Paris I met my husband.
And did the joint help? Did they help you at all?
Yeah, they gave us some clothes, I remember, to put on. They gave me a coat and a skirt. They didn't help very much. Whatever they had, they helped with.
And when you went back to Germany, did you go to the DP camps in Germany?
No, my new uncle, the man that my aunt married, he found a lot of survivors that he was with in the war, in the camps, and they helped him to find a flat, and we moved in.
And do you remember which towns you were in?
Yes. Slipped my mind now. I know the towns. Near Munich. We were near Munich, the town.
And was it very difficult going back to Germany, thinking...
Well, we wanted to get away from Poland. It was too anti-Semitic. So we had to go first to Germany. From Germany we tried very hard. It was very, very difficult. We tried to go to Paris. Now that journey, we went a few times. We were sent back from the borders. My uncle was buying false, not passports, like visas to go to Paris. Well, it took a long time. Eventually we arrived there. So in Paris we started making some sort of a life for ourselves.
How come he chose to go to Paris?
Well, that was the nearest place to go to. Where could we go to? You couldn't go to Palestine. We couldn't go to America. We couldn't go anywhere. So we went to Paris. In Paris, he eventually found work. He bought a flat, he started working for himself. He made some sort of a living.
And you stayed together?
Yes.
And they were good to you? They were.
Yes. My aunt was very good to me. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, and did they have any children?
Hitler killed them all, and after the war they couldn't have any children.
So you were like a daughter?
Yeah. Oh yes, till the end. Till they died.
Wow.
Yes.
And how did you meet your husband?
He came to Paris with his mother on a holiday. They had family there, and it was like mutual family things. So I met him there, and he brought me to London. We got married here.
And your husband was in the British Army?
Yeah.
And he was one of the liberators of Bergen-Belsen?
Yeah. He was in the British police.
So he might have even seen you when he
most likely, but I didn't know who he was.
And we have a picture of you and your husband.
Yeah.
It's a very beautiful picture.
Yes.
And at your chasana, did you get married in England?
In England.
And your aunt came for the chasana?
No, they couldn't come. They wasn't naturalized yet. It was too difficult for them to come here.
But they must
later on they came. Later on.
They must have been very happy for you. Very.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Later on, when they could, they had papers already, and they could come.
Wow. And Rene, can I just ask, when they did manage to come, did they leave France and did they come and settle in England?
No, they came for a visit
But you kept the communication, you kept
I used to go
the
there.
connection.
Yes, I used to go there very often.
And when you came to England, where did you live? Were you in London?
Yeah, well, my husband had a house, so I stayed there with his mother.
And they took you in very well, his mother?
Yeah.
And you raised a family, and did you...
See, Hitler didn't win.
Baruch Hashem. And you remained from?
Yes, my husband was more from than I was. People who came out of the camps were not from at that time. But yeah, my husband was from, so I got used to it.
Baruch Hashem. And your children?
Yeah, they're all right. They're lovely.
And they live here in England?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. And I've just had a...
My son phones me every day. We saw he just phoned.
So here we have a picture.
Yeah.
If you could just speak a little bit about the picture. You here with the Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah.
When did you meet the Queen?
I think at the 50th or 60th anniversary after the liberation, in one of the palaces. That was Palace of Westminster, I think. One of the palaces.
And it's you and your husband and the Queen?
The Queen, yes.
Sure. And you've been with the BBC back to the camps?
Yes.
Was it
They took me everywhere where I was during the war. We went back to Germany, we went back to Poland. They arranged everything.
And was it very difficult to go back?
It was very difficult. It was very difficult to go back. Yes. But I've done it, and since then I buried the ghost, and I've been going back there, back and forwards.
How many times have you been back?
I went on March of the Living 8 times.
And you take groups with you? They come with you?
Yeah, yes.
It's the people that go with you, and to have a survivor going on the March of the Living. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, unbelievable.
But it must be very hard for you to go back.
It's very hard, of course. It's a very hard, difficult journey as well. You have to get up about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. And you don't come back to the camp till about 9 o'clock in the evening. Till you have something to eat, and whatever. It's late already, and it's hard. It's a hard journey, that March of the Living, but it's worth going.
And I think everybody here
should go once at least.
And I think everybody must be so grateful and so appreciative that you are with them when you
I went once with South Africa, a very, very from organization from South Africa. I went with them to Poland.
Mizrahi, maybe it was
No. Very, very from...
And do you give talks in different schools?
I went all over England. Now I can't do it anymore. I don't do it now. But all over England I went. And they made up what you call it, a hologram of me. I've got a hologram. And someone sent me a letter, a card, a New Year card, and she said, it would be wonderful to show you Rene Salt forever.
Sure. Yeah.
They wanted to show it to me. I haven't got a chance to get there. It's in Bet Shalom. Have you heard of Bet Shalom?
Where is it?
I'm so bad for names.
Wow, but they made a hologram. That's wonderful.
Hologram, yes. Yeah.
And Rene, do you attend reunions of survivors? Or
not now anymore. Not now. I don't do much now. I don't do much.
And did you discuss your harrowing and the very difficult experiences what you went through with your children when they were growing up?
No. They learned a lot in school.
When did you start speaking?
My grandchildren I took with to Bet Shalom, so they heard me speak there. But I couldn't speak directly to them. It was too difficult.
But when did you start speaking? Or
after 50 years.
And before that you never?
Not a word.
And with your husband?
With my husband we sometimes spoke about Bergen-Belsen, but whenever he spoke about Bergen-Belsen he was crying, so he left it. So the tears were running down his face.
And were many of your friends also survivors?
Yes, yeah.
And are your children interested in the Shoah, in the Holocaust?
Yes, of course they are.
And your grandchildren today?
My grandchildren are also interested in it.
And Rene, if I could ask, what type of message do you give to when you go on the March of the Living, or when people ask you, what type of message do you impart or you leave to the next generation?
I always tell them is they should live in peace with one another, no matter who they are, who the people are, what color, what religion. They should just try and keep, live in peace, so the world might be a better place to live in.
Yeah. It's a beautiful message, and if only people would listen to your message.
Yeah.
So Rene, I just want to thank you so much. I am so incredibly grateful. I'm just going to come into the video. Wait, 1 minute. I just want to thank you personally. So Rene, I'm so grateful to you, and there are no words really. I know it was very difficult for you, incredibly difficult, but it's so important that what you went through, that people can see and to learn and to see what an amazing woman you are.
I was a very good speaker as well. I was one of the best speakers they had. But now I can't do it.
You're amazing. You still speak beautifully, and it's from the heart. And what is amazing is there were so many miracles, that there were 3 children. I've been in Lodge. I've been in the cemetery.
Yeah.
And you were only 3 children that were left, and you were one of those 3.
3 children from Stynskavola, from my town, to come to Lodge.
From your town?
From my town, 3 children. And I don't even know if the other 2 survived.
But when they took away to Treblinka, Baruch Hashem, you survived. They didn't take you.
They didn't take me.
It's a miracle.
Yeah, it's also, you live with it and forgive it, and they left me.
And can I ask, how did you have this picture of your sister?
I had nothing left. I had nothing. But the picture of my sister and of my parents. Did you see my parents?
No, you have a picture of your parents?
Yes, it's outside hanging. That was little snaps. My parents sent it to Israel. They had my parents had friends in Israel. They sent them as a little picture before the war, and they sent it back to me. Otherwise I wouldn't have it.
So this is a picture of your parents?
Yeah.
And this is the original picture?
Yeah, but it was a small one, and I had it made a little bigger.
What's so sad is that your mother went through so much, and right at the very end.
12 days.
But really, which I find also unbelievable. I mean, you saw people dying. You saw the worst imaginable.
The worst imaginable thing.
And Baruch Hashem, you still remained frum. You brought up a frum family. That is in itself a miracle.
It is.
I think the greatest miracle. Well, you should just have nachas and good health and Mevesrim.
Thank you very much.
And we're very grateful.
A hot cup of tea.